on Yud Beis, Amud Beis 12b. We are at the stage where Moshe is now floating in the basket. And the last discussion we had was, we discussed how the basket was made, pitch on the outside, clay on the inside. Rabbi Gimel sent an email with interesting different tidbits about that, comparing it with the ark that Noah was in, which had pitch on the inside and outside. Obviously, his spiritual standing wasn't as high, wasn't as lofty, and therefore he didn't have the non-smelling element on the inside like Moshe Rabbeinu did, or technically he was an adult, and therefore maybe could handle it. It can bring perfumes and spices to offset the smell. Right. Rabbi Gimel also added his own thought, which I thought was interesting. Moshe Rabbeinu protects he defends his people. Did he go a much more pleasant experience, whereas Noah saved his family, wasn't successful in persuading anybody else in his generation to change their ways or to be saved. Maybe these are interesting ideas to compare it to that. Anyway, so we discussed how the basket was made, and then we discussed where it was placed. That was the last thing. It was placed in, the verse says Suf. So does Suf mean Yam Suf, which is the Red Sea, or does Suf mean reeds, as in a marsh, an agam, marshlands? And the verse continues, the narrative continues in chapter 2 of Exodus. That's the top first line on the page. The last three words. Vateda bas Parai, and the daughter of Paro went out, lirchotz al Yaor, to bathe or wash in the river. And Rashi tells us already, as the Gemara is going to explain in a moment, her bathing was a form of conversion, like going to mikvah for conversion. As the Gemara explains now, Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, Mishum Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Malamed, this teaches us, Yarda, she descended, lirchotz, to wash herself, migilulei avia, from the idolatry of her father's house, of her father. So the washing here is not just a physical cleansing, but a spiritual cleansing. She's going to mikvah to convert.
If she was in a house of idolatry, how could she have known about God?
That's a good question. Where would she have learned about God? And maybe because the Jewish people, she learned it from the slaves. The slaves maintained their faith. No, this is during slavery.
Oh, yeah,
Moses is in the basket. This is during slavery time. So maybe she knows it. Maybe she knows about it from the Jews. And remember, a little while earlier, the Jews were not slaves. The Jews were just a well-established, respected element of the populace. Right? They even had one of their people, Yosef, saved the country a couple of years ago. So maybe she knew from them. Anyway, so that's the Gemara comments that she went down there to convert, to cleanse herself spiritually from idol worship. So she was going to mikvah. It's part of the conversion process. Sorry?
Was it Rachel or Rivka who lived with Laban?
Rivka lived with Laban.
She also didn't bother the
1 second, no, Rivka is Besuel's daughter. Rachel and Leah live with Laban. I mean, they're related. They're all related, but yeah. Still maintain their piety. Yeah.
They were twins.
Rachel and Leah? Yeah. No, yeah, interesting.
And it makes sense because that's why he made a mistake. He didn't recognize.
Could be. But here is interesting though. Like, I don't know what this idea of her going to convert. Oh yeah. So the
decided to renounce idolatry at the time.
Yeah, so she went to renounce her idolatry. But Rashi says Litva l'shem l'shem geda. She went to convert. She went to immerse herself in the mikvah for the
spiritually cleanse herself of idolatry.
Okay, so the Gemara is spiritually cleanse herself of idolatry, but here Rashi adds Litva l'shem l'shem geda, to immerse yourself there for the intent of conversion. Now, conversion requires a bethin. So exactly was a bethin there, and was this like a technical, real halachic conversion? I'm inclined to say no. The reason why I'm inclined to say no is because till the giving of the Torah, there was no legal status of a Jew. In fact, all the Jewish people went through conversion in Mount Sinai. We all went to the mikvah, we all got a brit milah, we all brought a korban, and we all accepted the yoke of heaven by saying Nasa v'nishma, we'll do and we'll listen. In fact, the laws of conversion are modeled on the process by which the Jews became Jews at Mount Sinai. So there's a big discussion amongst the commentaries exactly what the status of the Jewish people were before the giving of the Torah, but it did not have the halachic status that we have today, which is why when Rashi says going to mikveh for the sake of conversion, I don't know that it means halachic conversion like we can see it today, but more of a symbolic conversion, as in like you're saying, she's cleansing herself from the idolatry and immersing herself to say, I'm no longer part of that lifestyle. I want to dedicate my life to the one omnipresent God.
They all had to immerse prior to the hearing of the Torah.
That's what I'm saying, because we went through conversion.
Yeah.
Because we weren't halachically Jews before the giving of the Torah. So how would Paro's daughter be doing conversion when there is no halachic status of conversion yet at all?
Right.
That's why I'm suggesting that it's more of a spiritual conversion rather than an actual halachic conversion. Because all of Judaism was spiritual till the Torah came around, till the giving of the Torah. The whole thing was an idea, was spiritual. Right? Now, after the Torah is given, Judaism has a legally binding element. There's a covenant, it's legally binding. Here are the rules, here are the mitzvahs that are physical. Before the giving of the Torah, mitzvahs were not physical. It was a spiritual relationship you had with God.
She may have been the first convert.
But I'm, again, making a point here. It cannot be conversion as we know it.
No.
Can't.
No, for sure not.
Because Jews themselves had to go through conversion. But is she the first one who is not of the descent of Abraham to join? I don't think so, because Abraham himself had followers. Right? Abraham himself inspired a bunch of people to follow the idea of monotheism. Right? So she was in that style, in joining the Abrahamic faith, but in a spiritual sense, not in any legally binding sense, because there was no legally binding Judaism then.
She
Right?
may have been eating treated food all the time also.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah.
Maybe she just felt cleansed.
She felt cleansed. I'm denouncing idol worship. Anyways.
It seems to be the only written account of a formal.
Well, the Torah does say about Abraham, Ves hanefesh asher asa b'charan, and the souls they made in Haran, implying that they made souls, they made people, meaning they inspired people. That's a biblical reference there to. It's a biblical reference to people who joined Abraham's faith. Right? So there is the biblical reference already going back to Avram that he's inspiring other people to follow monotheism. Right? We had in the Gemara earlier that he called out in there to the name of God. And the Gemara tells us that not that he himself called out, but he made others call out to God. So we already have from Abraham this tradition of inspiring others to follow monotheism. But all that doesn't have the legal conversion where they become Jews, because they didn't. We only became Jews at Mount Sinai. Till then we were the children of Israel. Right? Anyway, okay. So the Gemara continues, the Chenu Omer, fourth line, and so too it says a verse using the term washing with respect to cleansing oneself spiritually. As the verse reads, and I believe it's in Isaiah. Let's make sure I look it up. Yep, Isaiah 4:4. The verse reads, Imrachatz Hashem es tzayas b'nai Zion. If God is going to cleanse the dirt, the excrement of the daughters of Zion, is to say spiritually cleanse the Jewish people. Now the next verse reads, the next verse in the narrative of Batya reads, so the verse continues, right? The entire verse goes like this. Vatered bas Pare, and the daughter of Pharaoh went down to wash herself in the river. We just described it as a spiritual cleansing as well as a physical cleansing. And the verse continues. And her maidens walking with her at the riverbank. And they saw, or she saw the container, in the reeds, and she sent out her arm, and she took the basket. So let's now analyze each of these words. So first, her maidens are going with her to the riverbank. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan comments, this walking, this going, when it says that her maidens were going with her, is actually a euphemism or indication of death. They were dying. And as well, there's a verse elsewhere which uses the term hoylech, going, in the context of death. I hereby am going to die. Again, this word going used for death. This is a verse in where Esau says, I'm going to die. It's a verse in Genesis. So there's a term of going used for death. We're going to see in a moment why they died. We're going to find that out in a moment. But for now, let's just accept that they were dying. Her maidens are dying. Pretty wild. Sorry?
Can't forget about it.
We're going to get there in a moment. The Gemara is going to tell us the story. But first, the Gemara is going to. We'll get to the story now. So the next verse reads, Batela Sateva, and she, Batya, saw the container in which Besay Chasuf in the reeds with Moshe in it. So now the Gemara explains the narrative of what exactly happened behind the scenes and why they're all dying. The Gemara reads, Given the Chazim, the Kaboy Latzulay, when the maidens saw that Batya was going to save Moshe to Moshe Rabbeinu, they saw that they saw her. She indicated that she wanted to save this baby in a basket. Amrullah, so the maidens told Batya, give your tainu, our mistress. Minagenu shel olam, the way of the world is Melech basar adam geyser, a human king decrees, Gzeira decrees, and am kol olam kula in mekaymen oisa. Even if other people or the rest of the world do not follow the instruction of the king, but his very children and household, they do fulfill the decree. Va'at, and you, Batya, overet agzeres avicha, you are going against the decree of your father. Your father said to kill all the baby boys, and here you are saving one. It's a dangerous precedent. If other people, countrymen, don't listen to the king, okay, it happens. King's decrees aren't followed. But his own family is going to betray him? So this is the maidens trying to protect Batya. Her maidens trying to protect her by saying, don't save this baby. It's going to be horrible for your relationship with your father and your father's king. You don't want to mess around with that relationship. Now, this is very reasonable. And this could have easily persuaded Batya. So God had to intervene here and prevent the maidens from changing Batya's mind. So Gavriel arrived, Gavriel the angel, God's agent, and like chaftan means like grabbed them inside the earth. So they were swallowed up by the earth on the spot. So she died. They all died. Not she died, her maidens died. Her maidservants, not her maidens, maidservants, they all died. This is why they died. They died because they were trying to protect her, which would lead to the death of Moshe. So God intervenes, silences them forever. No longer going to intervene with Batya's plans. Pretty wild story. Yeah?
I read somewhere where one of her maidens, God made one of her maidens stretch her.
Oh, let's see in a second. We'll see in a second. The Gemara's not done the story. We'll get there. Okay, so now the verse continues. Vatishlach as amasa, and she sent out her arm, which is a very interesting language for two reasons. Number one, the word amasa, which means her arm, could also mean amta, like her maid. So amta could be either arm or maid. Moreover, it says vatishlach, and she sent. You don't send out your arm. You stretch out your arm. So why is the verse saying vatishlach and she sent? So therefore, there's actually a discussion here. Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Nachman are discussing the translation. When it says she sent her amma, what does it mean she sent her amma? So Chad Amar, one says yada. It actually means her arm. She sent out her arm. Okay. The Chad Amar shivchasa, and one says she sent out her maid. So Manda Amar yada, the one who says yada, that she stretched out her actual arm. So this is clear. Amasa. It says her arm, even though the word could also mean an amma, like a maid, but the simple translation is her arm. Okay, so it says she sent out her arm. It means literally her arm. Now, Oman de Amar Shechasa, the one who says she sent out her maid, why does he come to that conclusion? Why doesn't he say that amasa means arm? So it says the Gemara made the likes of yada, because it doesn't say her hand. The verse doesn't say yada, her hand. It says amasa. Amasa does mean arm, but can also mean maid. If it meant arm, it should have said she sent out her hand, because it's not the arm that takes the baby. It's the hand that takes the baby. So it should have said tishlach es yada. She sent her hand. Why does it say amasa? Her arm. So thus this other opinion says it actually doesn't even mean arm. It means amma, her maid. Now the Gemara further asks your question. Sorry? This can also be context versus literal, yes.
She's a princess, Pharaoh's daughter. So
and in context, she would.
She had other people do her work for her.
But here comes the problem. We just finished saying that what happened to her maids, They all died.
They were dying.
This is Alan's question. She says the Gemara, the view who says that she sent out her maid, Ha'amris, we just finished telling us that Bogavriel, that a Gavriel came, and made them be swallowed up in the earth.
But that was only for them trying not to save him.
So it seems like they're all gone.
Anything towards saving
So it seems like there are not. So for the Gemara said, the Shayla Chada, there's one maid left behind. There's one maid who did not put, one loyalist, so Batya, who said, I don't know if she said this, but presumably, I'm your maid, whatever you want goes. And therefore, that was the one that stayed alive, and this is the one that she says, please go get the baby, according to that opinion. Okay. Why is that? So why is one saved? Actually, I just said because she was a loyalist, but the Gemara says not necessarily. Or meaning, not that what I said is necessarily wrong, but the Gemara gives a different reason for why one is alive. Because it is inappropriate for a princess to be left alone, and therefore she had to have at least one loyal maid. Okay. And the Gemara goes back. According to the opinion which said that it wasn't her maid she sent out, but her arm, it was her hand. So lichtav yada. Why doesn't it say yada, her hand? Why does it say her arm? Why does it say her arm?
Or maybe it's like she used a stick, like an arm. Extension of an arm.
That doesn't work in Hebrew. That wouldn't work in English. That works, but not in Hebrew. It has to work in the language of it. So why doesn't it say her hand? If it's actually her hand, why doesn't it just say her hand? Why amasa, which is her arm? So explains the Gemara Kamash Malon. This teaches us her hand stretched out, her arm stretched out. So when it says she sent out her arm, it means she sent her arm to be stretched, and that's why we're referring not to her hand but to her arm, because her arm is doing the main work. Even though technically speaking, she's picking up the baby with a hand, but it's her arm that gets sent out because her arm gets stretched to be able to reach the baby. And this is where all the pictures that we have from the kids comes from this Gemara.
The hand is just the extension of the arm.
Yeah.
So the arm went out.
Right, but ordinarily you would say, but tishtach yoda, a person sent his hand, because the arm doesn't do the work. It's the hand that picks. But over here, it was the arm that did the sending. It was the arm that extended doing the sending. And thus it says tishtach hasamasa. Yeah. Sorry?
Yeah, God.
Yeah.
He was there.
Stretching out his arm, her arm. I'm curious as to what the guys think about the spiritual significance of stretching the arm out. And also the significance of the maids dying and all that, and keeping one.
It's funny that he sent Gabriel to kill them.
Yeah.
But they don't mention him sending an angel to help to stretch her arm.
Right. Yeah. Good point. Good point. Yeah. Anyway, the Gemara says, with respect to this point, that she stretched out, her arm got stretched out. The Amar Mar, for master has taught us, this is the Gemara in Megillah, which we learned many moons ago. If you remember, one of the first Gemaras we learned here when I moved was the Gemara in Megillah. And there the Gemara said that the Gemara discusses the narrative of Moshe Rabbeinu and Oig, the giant Oig, and it talks about a big rock that he tried to dump upon the Jewish people, and the rock fell and collapsed on his head. He wanted to remove it, and when he wanted to remove it, his teeth grew hugely large, blocking him from removing that stick. And the Gemara there says that this idea of a body part being stretched out is similar. So too you find with respect to the extension of Pharaoh's arm, of Pharaoh's daughter's arm. Likewise you find with respect to the teeth of the wicked, the story with Oig. So we have elsewhere in the Gemara, where the Gemara is comparing body parts being stretched out, and one of them is Pharaoh's daughter. And therefore we can apply that here to explain why it says sent out her arm. Okay, so there's here the Gemara there. We're quoting now the Gemara in Brachas, and there the Gemara quotes a verse to indicate this idea that the teeth of the wicked are stretched out. The Ksiv, as the verse reads, Shini Dishoyim Shibarta, the teeth of the wicked you break. But this word Shibarta can be translated also as, like we said before, Shatira, that it's stretched out. As the Gemara tells us, Omer Shlokish taught, Al Tikri Shibarta. Don't read it Shibarta, you broke. Ella Sherivavta, that you stretched out. Okay. The Gemara continues the narrative of Batya. The verse continues reading after she sent out her arm, whatever that means, either her arm or her maid. All of her other maids died. She has one maid left, and she sends that maid to go get the baby. Or all of her maids are gone, and she sends out her arm gets stretched. The verse then reads, and she saw the child. But the word she saw is in the plural. Not that she saw, not that they saw, that kind of plural, but rather that they saw something in the plural. The seeing, the vision is in plural. That extra aleph, that extra hey does that. The extra hey vav actually turns the vision into a plural. And if the Gemara asks,
meaning more than one thing.
Exactly. The Gemara asks, it should have said she saw in the singular, not in the plural. So Rabbi says, because she did see more than one thing. She saw the presence of God there with him. She saw the presence of God there with him. So it wasn't just Moshe Rabbeinu she saw, but she's able to see the manifest presence of Hashem there too as well.
He still had that glow.
He still had that glow, that's right. That we described yesterday, or was it 2 days ago? Yes, that's correct. Now the verse continues, or actually, is it the next verse already, or is it the same verse? Yeah, I think it's the next verse. Wait, why isn't it quoted on the side of the Gemara here? Interesting.
It's verse 6.
It's verse 6, yeah, but usually this version of the Gemara usually quotes the entirety of the verse on the margins. It doesn't do it for this verse, which is interesting. Okay, probably an oversight. So the verse continues, verse 6. And behold, a young lad is crying. The Gemara says, in the preceding verse, we referred to Moshe Rabbeinu as a child. Right? They put the child into the basket. So the verse says. And now, now we're saying a nar, which is a young lad, is crying. So is a yeled, or not, or is a yeled a child, or nar a young lad? Now, by biology, it's still a baby, so it wouldn't be nar, a young lad. So what's this language about? So Tana, we learned in Mishnah Age text, who yeled, he was indeed a young child, but koiloi, his voice, kenar, was like a more mature young adult. So his cry were not the cries of a baby, but the cries of, or the sound sounded like a more mature young lad, a nar. Divi Rabbi Yehuda, these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. So this is Rabbi Yehuda's view. Amalei Rabbi Nechemia tells his colleague Rabbi Yehuda, in Cain is so that as a baby, Moshe Rabbeinu has an adult voice. Asisu Moshe Rabbeinu, we've turned Moshe Rabbeinu, Balmum, into someone with a defect. It's not a natural thing. It's not necessarily a positive. It's an awkward thing. That a baby has a voice of an, sorry? Yeah, but it's a Balmum, it's a blemish. And Ashi tells us specifically, the Moshe Rabbeinu is a Levite. And the Levites have to sing in the temple. And if they have a mum, if they have a defect in their voice, they can't do their work. And certainly Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't prohibited from doing the service in the temple. But if he has this awkward voice, then he would be prohibited in the temple. So why would you do that? Why would you say that Moshe Rabbeinu has this awkward defect? What's pushing you to say that? But now Rabbi Nechemia now has to explain why the verse refers to him as a young man.
Couldn't be a young man because
he was a baby.
He had to be nursed.
Yeah. So why is the verse referring to him as a na'ar? Na'ar means a young man. So Rabbi Yehuda's suggestion was he's a young man because he had a voice of a young man. Rabbi Nechemia doesn't like that because that means you're giving Moshe Rabbeinu this awkward defect, this awkward blemish in his voice. And therefore, Rabbi Nechemia has to give another suggestion for why we're referring to Moshe Rabbeinu as a na'ar, as a young man. And here comes something that's very wild, and the floor is open to try to understand this. Says, sorry?
Here we go.
Yeah. Says the Gemara, Ella rather says Rabbi Nechemia, Melamed teaches us this word nar. We're referring to Moshe Rabbeinu in the basket as a young child, as a young man. Nar is a young nar is like somewhere in like the teenage years. So says the Gemara, this teaches us, says Rabbi Nechemia, Sha'asas imai, his mother made for him chupas no'udim, a chuppah of a young man, beteva in the ark. She built for him a small chuppah in there. Go figure. Why? Amra, she said, Shemaloi eskala chupasli. I don't know what's going to happen to this child. I may never see him on his wedding day. He may never live that long. I may never see him. I don't know where he's going to be. So she decided to build for him a chuppah in the basket as a baby. What's the most obvious question on this statement? How does building a chuppah help you see his wedding? He's a baby. You're concerned you're not going to see his wedding. Well, what exactly is bothering you about not seeing the wedding? Because you're not going to see a canopy? And all of a sudden now you put a canopy over a baby, now you're settled because you see a canopy? Like how does putting a canopy in a basket help?
In the case of Torah.
But, right, so if it said to protect him from the elements, okay. But it says because she was, she felt bad. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to see my son's wedding. Let me make a wedding now. So I'm going to put a chuppah. How does putting a physical structure of a canopy over your baby somehow settle your emotion that you're not going to see your child get married one day? Like, is it technically the canopy that's bothering you? You're not going to see. What's bothering her is that you're not going to see him get married to a woman and have children. Like every parent wants to see their child grow up, get married, and have children, right? So how does putting the chuppah over a baby in a basket help? Strange phenomena, which is pushing me to think that what she's concerned with is not that she's not going to see him get married, but that may be on the literal level. But maybe deeper, she is worried she's not going to see him grow up to achieve the spiritual significance of a chuppah. What's the spiritual significance of a chuppah? A chuppah is, very briefly, in Kabbalah we have two types of divine manifestation or energy within creation. One is specific energy, that is to say, the table has to get energy tailored for table to exist. Humans have to get energy tailored for humans to exist. So it's a very specific energy. So it's called pnimi. It's internal investment. God invests within the internal nature of each individual creation, giving it its particular life form. Then there is what's called makif, that which envelops. It's a transcendent. Hashem is everywhere. Is Hashem different in his presence in the table as he is in the phone or in the house? No, it's equal. It's all the same. Right, so there's two elements. God is present everywhere equally versus, no, God's giving a certain type of energy to the table versus a certain type of energy to the house versus a certain type of energy to the sun. Following? Simple analogy. Take a whole bunch of vessels you have, pots, pans, cups, and whatever, and you want to fill them up. Two ways you can do that. One is take it to the sink, turn on the sink, and let it fill up each cup individually. If you do it that way, then each cup requires a different amount of time till it's filled up. And some of these containers can hold hot water, some only cold water. If some cup has a hole in it, the water will spill out. Right? It's one way of filling up these vessels. Another way is take all those vessels and dump it into the ocean. If you dump it into the ocean, the ocean couldn't care less as to what size the vessel is. The sink does care about the size of the vessel because how long do you have to be on for? Can I give you hot water? Can I give you cold water? Can I fill you past the point of the hole? But if you dump them all in the ocean, even if it has a hole, the cup's still full. Because the ocean doesn't care. It's transcendent. So it's not that the ocean doesn't fill the cups. It fills the cups. It just fills all of them equally. So likewise, with Hashem's transcendence of our world, it doesn't mean that God, when we say God's transcendent, it doesn't mean he's miles away. He's right here. It's just that his presence here is irrespective of what happens to be here. So it's everywhere. But then there's another element in which Hashem invests in creation. No, it does matter what's here. If this is a table, we have to give energy for table. If this is a human, we have to give energy for human. If this is a sun, we have to give energy for sun. A moon, energy for moon. So there's these two elements of the divine interaction with our world. One, that Hashem covers all of existence just equally, doesn't make a difference what's there. And another is, it does make a difference what's there. I got to give you this amount, that amount. So actually, these two elements are expressed in talus versus tefillin. Tefillin is heart, mind. There's specific messages in there. That's an internal message. I have to connect to God internally. My mind has to understand God as much as it can. My heart has to feel God as much as it can. That's the internal experience. Sorry?
That's the analogy with the sink.
Yes, that's the analogy of the sink. It's got to be internal. That's right. I have to internalize the message of God in tefillin. Whereas talus is not internalized, it's enveloped. I wrap it around me. Right? Even like technically, every person can have the same size talus theory.
Right.
Tefillin, no. Each person has to have a different size tefillin. Different size tefillin. Bigger, smaller, the strap's bigger, smaller, the box, right? It has to be positioned in a certain place, my arm and head. So what fits for me doesn't fit for you.
Oh, size meaning the straps.
Literally the size of the tefillin. Even the box, if it's too big, it could be too big. If it's too small, it could be too small, depends on my body size. It has to fit on my arm, it has to fit on my head. But with a talus, basically everybody can have the same size talus.
Right.
As long, not exactly because it's less to wrap a certain amount of your body, but theoretically it's more possible. Anyway, but the talus is expressive of Hashem envelops you, right? You read, when we put the talus on, we read, Ma'yaka Chazdacha, we talk about being enveloped by Hashem there, right? That's the idea of being enveloped, being enwrapped by Hashem's, like a bear hug from Hashem. When you talk to somebody, you use this analogy. When you talk to somebody, depending on who you're talking to, you use different words, depending on their level of intelligence, depending on their age, depending on who they are, what your relationship with them is. So that's an internal connection. And when you give someone a hug, it makes a difference. A hug is a hug because you're enveloping them. You're not going internal. So envelopment, it does make a difference. The recipient, it doesn't make a difference who the recipient is when you're talking about enveloped transcendent relationship. And that's what chuppah is, which is why, by the way, in Chabad, we don't wear talis until wedding. Because this level of transcendence is only acquired once a person is married. It's one of the reasons why in Chabad we don't wear talis till wedding. And this is maybe, perhaps what she's saying, that I wish to see my son relate to Hashem on this transcendent level. Because when he gets the Torah, which by the way, Torah, when we got the Torah is also a marriage, right? The marriage between the Jewish people and God is a Torah. And there's the clouds of glory is a kind of chuppah, right? We're enveloped by Hashem's presence. And
Like the talus.
that's right, the chuppah is like the talus. And connecting to Hashem through Torah mitzvahs is not just to connect to God on the internal level, but also on the transcendent level. Hashem's transcendence is expressed in Torah, as paradoxical as that is, but it's expressed that way. So she's saying, I may never see my son reach this level that I know he's going to get to, where he's going to connect to Hashem on this lofty transcendent level, on this chuppah level. And therefore, she decides of her own, maybe she had that connection with Hashem, she had this transcendent connection to Hashem, and she decided to invest it in her son too, so that she can see him get it too. This is perhaps what the Gemara means on a more deeper level. Because on a simple level, I mean, like, how does putting a canopy on his head quench a mother's desire to be at the child's wedding? Like, how does it help? But if we're talking about a spiritual energy of what the chuppah represents, so this is a possibility. She invested that spiritual energy in him even now when she's in the basket, not waiting for him to be in a later time. So which means not only his own spiritual energy did he have on birth, but his mother bequeathed to him a higher spiritual energy, a transcendent, a chuppah type energy, to give him this added protection in the basket, perhaps. Yeah.
So is there an analogy between being wrapped up in the talus and being immersed in a mikvah?
Yes, very similar. Very similar. Mikvah is also that transcendent idea, which is why it's cleansing, because it overtakes everything. That's right. Mikvah is definitely that kind of experience transcending. So is sukkah. Sukkah is also. So, for example, sukkah is a good example, because sukkah is a transcendent mitzvah, it envelops you. But the lulav and esrog, exact opposite. You bring it close to your heart. It's very specific. And there you see also, a sukkah is a sukkah. One sukkah, different sukkah. A sukkah is a sukkah. All Jews can sit in one sukkah, the Gemara says. When it comes to lulav and esrog, no one has the same lulav and esrog. Right. Everybody's different. 2 adasim, 3 adasim, not 3 adasim, not 2, 3 adasim, 7 adasim, 10 adasim, a nicer esrog, a smaller esrog. It's different. It's tailored to the individual. Right. Whereas sukkah is enveloping. And what do? We shake the lulav in the sukkah. Because you want to take this transcendent experience and bring it into your heart.
And it's like the Arba Minim and the Lulav is like the
tefillin talus. Exactly. That's right. The Arba Minim is like the tefillin,
right? And
the sukkah is like the talus. That's correct.
Right.
So a lot of mitzvahs have this model of both of these things. That's right. Okay, so that's perhaps what's going on here. That she's investing in him this higher level of connection to Hashem, this transcendent level, this chuppah level, this talus level. All right. So wonderful day, everybody. Good Ner Shabbos, and we continue the narrative, God willing, on Monday. She's clearly a very special lady. Yeah.